Hello everyone, and welcome to another interesting game from round 7 of the 2018 Bill Chess Festival. Like I said, I will show all 3 games from round 7, as all of them were excellent. It's Shahriar Mamedyarov versus David Navara. Now, this game is really crazy. Navara really goes for a nice attack on the king side, but Mamedyarov is able to fend off the attack, and well, you'll see what happens next. But before we check out the game, we do have a nice photo challenge. It's gonna be a pretty tough one unless you're from Ireland, I believe. So let's check it out. Okay, we can make it a twofold photo challenge. Pretty sure you all know the Grandmaster on the left and FIDE president electionist, so feel free to to try and guess who the person on the left is. But the real question is who is the person on the right. I will give you a little hint. He has been writing a chess column for the Irish Times since 1955, which pretty much makes it the longest ongoing chess column in the world regarding chess. So there you have it. If you are from Ireland, you should definitely buy this man a beer or perhaps even dinner, as he has made a lifelong contribution to chess. So there you have it. If no one will guess, I will put a link in the description below with some information about this gentleman, so feel free to check it out. So we do have 2 photos from this round. There we have it. Navara came prepared for this game with a nice clean shave, Mamedyarov rocking the beard, but a very neat one at that. So let's check out this game. Mamedyarov has the white pieces and he opens with d4. Knight to f6, c4, e6, knight to f3 in the anti-Nimzo, and d5, of course transposing into the Queen's Gambit declined. e3, we have c5 immediately, knight to c3, a6, and now c captures on d5. One of the few openings the Queen's Gambit declined where it's okay to break the tension in the center for white. E captures on d5, and now bishop to e2. Knight to c6 developing, we have castles. C captures on d4, knight captures on d4, and the bishop to d6. And here Mamedyarov goes b3. As this is the strongest move recommended by the engine, I imagine it's a prepared line for Mamedyarov, as well as Navara's reply here. As you can continue developing pieces, queen c7, bishop d7, you can even castle, but bishop to e5. So kind of breaking an opening principle, but he wants to exchange some pieces. Definitely a prepared line. Knight captures on c6 with an attack on the queen, so you don't have time to grab the knight on c3. B captures on c6, and now a bishop to b2. And here we have h5, a very nice move. I really enjoy this move because it's a move I would most likely play. And you know, I would most likely lose this game, but Navara also plays it, and it's a very tricky move. If you simply continue developing with something like rook to c1, then you get a classic bishop sacrifice. The h5 move is now guarding the g4 square, so the knight is able to come there. So after bishop captures, you would lose a clean pawn here, as it's impossible to capture back because the knight to g4 check is coming, and now after king to g1, of course queen to h4, threatening checkmate on h2, you can capture the knight, but then you have another problem here. Also the queen is coming to h2. If you try and block this, create an escape route for the king, g3 is coming, and now there is no defense against queen to h2. And if you've never seen an h2 sacrifice with the bishop, it doesn't matter. For example, after knight to g4 check, you can even come to h3, but then this is a double check from the bishop and the knight. You lose the queen here, and it doesn't help if you come to g3 either, because then h4 is coming, forcing you to h3 to lose the queen once again, or if you come to f4, then queen to f6 will be checkmate. So a very interesting idea. h5, of course Mamedyarov will not fall for this. He pushes f4, first fends off the bishop from e5, we have bishop back to b8, and now knight to a4. We have bishop to a7, not allowing knight to come to c5, but also pressuring this e3 pawn, as it is a weak backwards pawn. Bishop to d4, we have bishop to g4 now, and here Mamedyarov simply captures the bishop, showing that there are no actual threats here. Bishop captures on g4, h captures on g4, and now rook to c1, even continuing development. And it seems like, you know, if this queen could ever come to h4, then it could be a dangerous position for white. The problem is there's nowhere, I mean, if you play something like knight to e4 to prepare this, then queen can simply capture on g4, and there's no good continuation here for black. And on the other hand, if you try something like g3, it's actually perfectly fine to capture it. H captures on g3, and now after knight to e4, for example, attacking the g3 pawn, you can simply defend it. Rook to f3. There's no way for you to capture. Both these pawns are preventing the queen from entering the game. It's a very nice position for white. So after rook to c1, Navarro goes queen to d6. We have queen to c2, now attacking the c6 pawn. And here, if you play something like rook to c8 to defend the pawn, well, that's not entirely possible because your bishop is hanging on a7. So after something like bishop to d4 was played in the game, e captures on d4, and now you have to decide what to do with your backwards c6 pawn. If you defend it with rook to c8, then you get rook to e1. This comes with check, and after you move the king, it seems like, okay, your king is somewhat safe on f8, and perhaps you want to use the open h, semi-open h file for the attack, but white will exchange queens here, and you will have no attack here. White will just enjoy his position, double rooks on the c file, and start attacking the weak c pawn and the a pawn. So after e captures on d4, we have castles. Queen captures on c6, so Navarro sacrifices a pawn, but temporarily, as you'll see. Queen to a3, trying to infiltrate the position and also attacking the a2 pawn. Queen to c2 defending, rook a to c8 attacking the queen, and now queen to b2. You might be able to even capture 2 rooks here for the queen, but there's no reason to do this. King h7, knight to c3 defending the pawn, and although white might be perfectly fine here, if you don't have to give up the queen, don't do it. Unless you're Nizhmetdinov playing Oleg Chernikov. But okay, queen to b2, now offering a queen trade, and here we have queen captures on b2, knight captures on b2, rook captures on c1, rook captures on c1, and now rook to e8. So Mamedyarov is up a pawn, but as you'll see, it will not be all that easy to keep this pawn. Rook to e8 by Navarro, threatening rook to e4 to capture either the f pawn or the d pawn. But also, if you try and defend it with something like rook to g3, then rook to e2 will be a very active move, attacking the knight. If you move the knight, the a2 pawn will be weak. If you defended this, then your position is just terrible. Both of your only two pieces are now completely passive, and after knight to e4, you are still up a pawn, but you can't move anything. No one would enjoy playing this with white. So after rook to e8, a nice move by Mamedyarov, king to f1. A king, is not just a spectator in the endgame. In the endgame, it becomes a very valuable piece. Rook to e4, and now g3, giving up the d4 pawn. Rook captures on d4, and now king to e2. Again, improving the position of the king. So the material is now equal, and g5 by Navarro. We have f captures on g5, and now knight to e4, going after the g5 pawn. Knight to d3, knight captures on g5, and now knight to f2, pressuring the g4 pawn. Rook to b4, with ideas of perhaps pushing this pawn, or a5, a4 would also be very nice for black. Rook to c5, attacking the d5 pawn, and now of course you cannot push d4 as your knight is hanging on g5, so first knight to e4, defending the d5 pawn with a tactic. Now of course you cannot capture it because this check will pick up the rook, so here rook to a5 is played by Mamedyarov. We have knight to f2, king captures on f2, and now rook to b6, defending the a6 pawn but giving up the d5 pawn. But as you'll see, Navarro has a plan to win the pawn back. Rook captures on d5, and now comes rook to h6, attacking the h2 pawn. And here a very interesting moment in the game. It seems like you can keep the extra pawn with king to g1. The problem is, after a move like rook to c6, rook to a5, now comes king to h7. And after king to f2, trying to bring the king back into the game, now black will just show you that this is impossible due to rook to e6. And now you see that the g4 pawn and the rook create like a tomb here for the white king. The white king is unable to enter the game, and white will not be able to push his extra pawn advantage from a position like this. So after rook to h6, a very endgame class move from Mamedyarov, king to e3. Allowing Navarro to capture the h2 pawn. Rook captures on h2, and now rook to a5, defending the a2 pawn and also attacking the a6 pawn. Here f5, allowing Mamedyarov to capture on a6. Now you see the problem. If you play rook to h6 to defend the a5 pawn, then you get rook to g5 with check, and what do you do here now? Of course, you can block this with rook to g6, but then this is completely lost. You will simply lose the g4 pawn here. If you block this, then after rook captures, pawn captures, although the material is equal, it's a winning endgame for white due to these pawns being doubled. You can simply push here, and 2 against 1 on the queen side. The king has to run on the queen side. You will simply pick up the king side pawns and then push the g pawn to victory, for example. So okay, after rook to a5, we have f5, not allowing rook g5 check. Rook captures on a6, and now comes rook to g2, attacking the g2 pawn, g3 pawn. King f4, rook f2 check, king g5, now comes rook f3, attacking the pawn, and now Mamedyarov simply plays king to h4, and now it is obvious that Mamedyarov will indeed keep his extra pawn. King to f7, Navarra now improves the position of his king. b4, Mamedyarov starts pushing his passed pawns. That's a passed pawn. I really saw how you enjoyed that little passed fast pawn skirmish in the previous video, but it's a passed pawn. King to e7, b5 now, king to d7, rook to a7 check, king to d6, and now rook to f7. Here, what do you play? If you attack the pawn with king to c5, then you get a4. The pawns will take care of each other here. So after rook to f7, rook to f2, and here b6. Rook to captures on a2, and now rook captures on f5. We have rook to b2, attacking the pawn here, and here a very nice move by Mamedyarov, rook to h5. Capturing the g4 pawn was also possible and perhaps even better, but okay, Mamedyarov goes for rook to h5. Here, what do you play? You have to understand that capturing here would lose you the game immediately. There's no way, you have to know these things right away, because after rook h6 with check, king moves, rook captures, king captures, king captures. Now you have to immediately see that you will be able to push this pawn all the way to promotion, and black will not be able to prevent this. So okay, after this rook to h5 move, of course you cannot capture here. We have rook to b4, not allowing white to capture the g4 pawn. We have rook to h8, again you cannot capture on b6 because of the same idea. We have king e5, rook to b8, and now king to f6. King to h5, king to g7, now comes king to g5, king to f7, and now comes rook to b7. Also possible here was king to h6, because now after black makes a move, let's say rook b5, b7 is coming, and after rook to b6 check, you play king to g5, and now you will be able to capture the g4 pawn, because if black defends it, then you get rook to h8, and now of course it's a winning game. If you capture on b7, then you're going to lose the rook, and you cannot prevent the pawn from queening. You will lose the rook due to this check here. So this was also a possible idea. Of course, this would not happen. Black would simply have to give up the g4 pawn, and then it's a winning endgame. But okay, king f7, we have rook to b7 check, king to e8, king to h4, king to f8, king to h5, both of them, just trying something. King e8, we have rook to b8 check, king f7, king to g5, king to g7, rook to b7 check, king to f8, king to f6, king to e8, and this is the position I had in mind when I named the video as I did. Here Mamedyarov played rook to b8 check, but there was a really hidden brilliancy here. So feel free to pause the video here if you enjoy pausing videos, and try to find the move Mamedyarov and probably both Navarra missed in this position. It's really a brilliancy. There's no other way to put it. So feel free. I will get a couple of seconds if you want to decide whether to do it or not. Here, the move that was missed, for those of you who were able to do it, you are a brilliant endgame player, and for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, rook to e7 check. Now, of course, all of you thought about rook to e7 check, but the idea is why rook to e7 check is so powerful. Whenever you have a diagram or a chess puzzle to solve, it almost never starts with a check. So probably why a 2800 plus Grandmaster didn't even consider it, or he did consider it, but he didn't think much of it. The reason it immediately wins is after king to d8, now you get b7. Of course, you simply push the passed pawn. And after rook to b6 check, you have this king to f7 move. And now the idea is simple. The threat is rook checks. After you move the king, then pawn promotes to a queen, rooks get exchanged, the king goes over to the g4 pawn, wins it, and then you push the g3 pawn to victory. So let's say something like rook b3 is played, here comes check, you move, the queen is brought into the game, captures, 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 and now you have to see that, like in the previous position, the king is able to capture this pawn, and he will be able to outmaneuver this king because the king is in front of the passed pawn. That's where you should always put your king. So there you have it. And also another thing you have to see after this king to d8 move, b7, rook checks, king to f7, black can also play rook to f6 check. You have to consider this as well, because now if you capture it, it's stalemate. The rook and pawn are completely cutting off the king has nowhere to go, it's stalemate. But again, you have to see that after rook to f6, you can simply push the king to g7, and now after black captures, you will get the queen into the game, or if you bring the rook back, rook to b6 to defend, rook to f7 is coming with the same idea. You will simply check, bring the queen into the game, exchange rooks, win the pawn, and then win the game. So okay, rook to e7, the hidden brilliancy. What happens if king comes to f8? It's also very nice. If king comes to f8, first you play rook to f7 check, and now the king can either go back to e8 or to f8. If the king goes back, now you simply play b7. Rook checks, king moves, and now it's the same threat. You will simply play rook to f8 check, bring the queen, exchange rooks, win the pawn, and push the g3 pawn to victory. Or if the king after this check goes to g8, which is also a possibility, of course, if king to g8, then you get rook to b7. A very nice idea. After black plays a move, there aren't all that many moves here. Now comes king to g6, threatening checkmate with rook to b8. King f8, and now, after the king has moved, now you check the king. After the king moves, this is the only square for the king, now you get b7. King moves, and now comes rook to h8, and now again a winning position. If you exchange, then rook to h7 wins. The rook exchanges the rook, and then king wins the g4 pawn and pushes the g3 pawn to victory. Or if you don't capture it, if you bring the king closer, it doesn't really matter. You will simply queen the pawn, captures, 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 and then win the g4 pawn and push the g3 pawn to victory. So a very nice idea. I mean, it's a position that could very well happen in one of your own games. So you know, you should perhaps remember this. If there are two pawns, you have a pawn here. You know, not impossible. Rook to e7 check wins the game. But okay, rook to b8 check was played in the game. We have king to d7 and now king to g5. King to c6 and now comes king to h5. Rook to e4, rook to g8 attacking the g4 pawn. King captures, rook captures. Of course, you cannot exchange rooks. Rook to e3 and now rook to g7. King c6, g4. Mamedyarov starts pushing his passed pawn. King d6, we have g5, king e6, king to g6. We have rook to g3, and after rook to a7, this is move 68, and it was in this position that David Navarra resigned the game. Why did he resign? Because it's a well-known winning position for the side that has the extra pawn. For example, after black makes a move, rook to h3, for example, cutting off the king from the h-file, the king is cutting off the white king from the f-file. You can simply move. After rook g3, you push the pawn. After rook h3, you can simply check the king. King moves, now you move the king again. After you pin the pawn, check, you move the king. We have check, king moves, now comes pawn comes to g7. And now how do you promote the pawn? After black makes a move, you check the king, king moves, you play rook a2. After black makes a move, you play rook e2. After black makes any move, now you go rook to e4, a very important move. You should remember this one, as now whatever black plays, you of course make the room for the pawn. And after black starts checking you with the rook, now you play rook here, king here, rook g3 check, king f6, now you got away, rook to f3, checking the king, now king comes to g5, and after check you will block the check, and then now you can freely queen the g7 pawn. captures, and there is no stopping from queening the pawn. So yeah, after rook to a7, Navarra didn't play this out as it's a well-known win, and a very nice victory for Shahriar Mamedyarov. And I did prepare the standings after round 7, so here they are. As you can see, Mamedyarov is now a full point ahead of Magnus Carlsen and Peter Svidler. Carlsen with 4.5, Svidler with 4, then Maxim Vachier-Lagroix with 3.5, and David Navarra with 3, and Nico Georgiadis still with only half a point out of 7, but as you all know, those that half a point came from Magnus Carlsen. So yeah, Mamedyarov already faced Nico twice, so he defeated Nico 2 times. Carlsen only played against him once, so there he will have his chance to create a full point against Nico, but you know, it will probably be a lot of pressure for him, you know, as he is the only one who was unable to defeat him, and if he will not defeat him in the next time they play, it will be very unlikely that he will be able to catch up to Mamedyarov. But today, I believe today Carlsen faces Svidler, and also going to be a very important match, if you know, that could decide the fate of this tournament. So yeah, that's the game. A wonderful endgame, a wonderful game all in all, a wonderful missed brilliancy. So there you have it. I do hope you enjoyed it and that you're enjoying the coverage of the Biel series. I believe, I have no idea how long this video is. Might be a bit longer, sorry about that. But you know, it's an endgame. What can you do? I would like to thank Doug and Gala Sly and Michael Carr for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon with a couple of more rounds from the Biel Chess Festival, if there will be some interesting games today, and of course continuing the Bobby Fischer series. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.